Hi everyone, my name is Adam Christina, and today I'm talking about something that honestly shocked me the first time I learned about it, and it is free will in deterministic universe. Basically, I'm asking the question, are we actually choosing our actions, or is everything already shaped by causes we don't control? It sounds huge and abstract, but it connects to everyday life. When you choose breakfast, when you argue with someone, when you decide your career, is that really you? Or is it your brain, your past, and the universe deciding for you? So today I'll try to break this down in a simple way without overcomplicating it. So on this slide, I want to explain why this whole topic even matters. For me, the interesting part is that in everyday life, we feel like we're free. When I choose what to eat, what school do I go to, or even what shoes to wear, it feels like those decisions come from me. So naturally, we think we're in control. But then science kind of pushes against that feeling. Physics and neuroscience say that everything in the universe follows a cause and effect. That means that every event has a reason before it. And if that's true for the world, maybe it's also true for our brains. So maybe my choice is just the result of brain activity that was already set up before I even noticed it. And that leads to the big question of this presentation. If the universe is deterministic, then where does our freedom actually fit? Can both be true at the same time, that we feel free, but the universe works like a machine? That's basically the idea behind this whole discussion. So, what is the meaning of determinism? The basic idea is pretty simple. Everything that happens in the universe has a cause. Nothing just pops out of nowhere. Every event is linked to something that came before it, kind of like a long chain. Science describes the universe as following strict physical laws. So, if you had the exact same conditions, you would always get the exact same result. For example, like if you drop a ball from the same height in the same place, it's always going to fall the same way. There's no randomness in a fully deterministic world. The important part is this: the past determines the present, and the present determines the future. So if we could somehow rewind time and press play again, everything would supposedly unfold in the exact same way. Your choices, your thoughts, and everything. This idea is what creates tension with free will, because it makes you wonder if everything was already fixed by the past. How free are we really? So now I would like to explain how physics connects to determinism. First, there is a Newton's view of the universe, which was basically like a giant clock. Every part of it follows strict physical laws, so if you knew the position of every particle, you could at least in theory predict everything that would ever happen. That's what people call the clockwork universe. It's a very clean, mechanical way of understanding the reality. But later, modern physics discovered something different at the quantum level. Tiny particles behave in ways that we can't predict perfectly. Sometimes they act like randomly, and we can't fully explain why. So the universe isn't like 100% predictable in the way that Newton imagined. But there is also the important part for our topic. Randomness does not automatically give us free will. If something in my brain happens randomly, that doesn't mean or is not making a free choice. It just means something unpredictable happened. So randomness doesn't solve the free will problem. It just shows that not everything is perfectly controlled by strict laws. So what philosophers mean by free will? They focus on three basic things. First is the ability to choose, meaning we can look at different options and actually pick one. Second is the idea that we could have done something else in the exact same situation. And that's very important because if there were no real alternatives, then it doesn't feel like a free choice. And the last one is moral responsibility. We only blame or praise people if we think they had some control. These three ideas are what most discussions about free will are built on. Now, let's quickly go through a few important philosophers who shaped the free will debate. I'll start with David Hume, who was an early compatibilist. He thought freedom basically means acting on your own desires, even if those desires were caused by other things. Then there's Daniel Dennett, a modern compatibilist who believes free will is still real enough for everyday life and for moral responsibility. On the other side, we have Sam Harris, who is a hard determinist. He argues that free will is an illusion because every choice comes from causes we don't notice. And finally, the last one is René Descartes, who believed the mind is separate from the body, which would allow for a kind of real, independent, free choice. These four show how wide the debate actually is. So on this slide, I want to talk about a really famous experiment that challenged the whole idea of free will. In the 1980s, a scientist named Benjamin Libet asked people to do something very simple. Just move their hand whenever they felt like it. While they did that, he measured their brain activity. What he found was pretty crazy. The brain actually showed signs of starting the movement about half a second before the person said they chose to move. So the action really began in the brain before the person decided. This made a lot of philosophers wonder if our feeling of choosing comes after the brain has already made a call. Alright, so let's see how modern brain scan studies expanded Libet's original experiment in the 1980s, which we were already talking about in the previous slide. Libet showed that the brain starts preparing an action about half a second before we became aware of deciding, but later research went even further. In 2008, scientists using fMRI found that they could actually predict a person's choice up to 7 or even 10 seconds before the person consciously knew it. Today, the main idea is that a lot of our thinking happens unconsciously. Our conscious mind might just be catching up to decisions the brain already made. And that raises a big question. If our brain predicts our choices before we're aware of them, then how much control does consciousness really have? So, hard determinism is basically the idea that free will does not exist. Hard determinists think that every choice we make has a cause behind it. So, if I decide to pick pasta over pizza, that choice didn't just appear. It came from my brain, my past experience, and even my genetics. Another point they make is that we didn't choose our brain or the environment we grew up in, and those things shape everything about us. So the feeling that we're fully in control might just be an illusion. Sam Harris is one of the big names right here. He argues that even though we feel like we're deciding, the decision was already made in our brain before we became aware of it. So compatibilism, it's kind of the middle ground of this whole debate. Compatibilists basically say that free will and determinism can both be true at the same time. It sounds weird at first, but their idea is actually pretty practical. They say you're free when your actions come from your own reasons and values, even if those reasons were shaped by your past. So it's not really about I could have done something completely different. It's more about acting without someone forcing you. And because of that, compatibilists still think more responsibility makes sense. If I choose something based on who I am, then I'm responsible for that. Like if I pick chocolate ice cream, that choice reflects my preferences, even if those preferences were shaped by earlier experiences. So let's talk about why the debate never really ends. First of all, people don't even agree on what free will means. Some think it means total control, while others just mean being able to act without force. So the conversation already starts from different definitions. Secondly, consciousness is still a mystery. We honestly don't fully understand how the mind works or how it connects to the brain, so it's hard to give a final answer. Another reason is that the stakes are really high. This debate affects how we think about justice, responsibility, and punishment, and maybe even how society should treat people. So finally, we all feel free. That feeling is very strong, and because of that, people don't want to believe free will might be limited or maybe even an illusion. So, after going through all the research and different ideas, I realized that the view that makes the most sense to me is really compatibilism. When I look at the science, it's pretty clear that our brains follow certain laws and patterns, which means like things don't just happen out of nowhere. But at the same time, in real life, it still feels like the choices we make actually matter. We learn from experiences, we grow, and we influence each other. And for me, compatibilism kind of connects both sides. It accepts that we're shaped by causes, but it also leaves room for personal responsibility and the idea that our values and reasoning still kind of like guide us. And honestly, that matches how life feels. We're not totally free, but we're also not like robots. So before I wrap up, I want to include two quick questions just to make sure the main ideas from earlier are clear. I'm not going to answer them here, they're just meant to get you thinking. The first one focuses on Libet's experiment and what it suggests about how decisions actually begin. And the second one asks about the basic idea behind compatibilism and how it relates to free will. I think these questions are meant to trick anyone. They just show how the same scientific findings can be understood in different philosophical ways. So just take a second and think about which answers make the most sense based on what we done through. So this last slide just shows the main sources that helped me build this presentation. I used a mix of philosophy articles, scientific research, and books from people like Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett. This really helped me understand both sides of the free will debate and gave me kind of like a background I needed to explain the topic clearly. And to wrap up everything up, I think the main thing I learned is that free will is more complicated than it looks. The science pushes us one way, philosophy pushes us another way, and our everyday experience makes the whole thing even more confusing. But that's exactly why the topic is so interesting. I think exploring these ideas helps us understand ourselves much better and think more carefully about why we do things that we do.